Hey friends, all right, we ready to talk about some political parties. At this point, we should have wrapped up quiz number 2 last week, and some of you might be catching up and just getting to that, but let's make sure we get through that pretty smooth. I hope that it wasn't too much of a difficulty for you all. It was covering the three branches, and now this is the pivot we make to covering really how the topics that help us understand how to engage with our government better. We're talking about the institutions and the intermediaries between us and our government. So let's begin with the first part on political parties. All right, so the main objective this week is really just to understand what political parties are, their general structures, and how they operate within the general contemporary political party system. We want to also identify some key terms like united and divided governments, and we're also going to do a brief dive into some third parties and the impacts that three significant third party candidates have had throughout U.S. history. What a perfect coincidence. Three of the most significant third-party candidates for third-party candidates. It's going to be perfect. And then we're going to look at how we're going to look into our contemporary political parties, and we're going to revisit some terms like party realignment, party de-alignment, and tipping to understand how political parties shift throughout decades. So let's get going. All right. So slight change of background. I had the girlfriend come home. So and I was doing this in the living room, so now I had to move back into the other room. So let's get going and talk about the differences between a united and a divided government. Well, to be clear, a united government and divided government does not pertain to their ability to work together and get things done. A united and divided government illustrates whether we have a single party maintaining leadership within the three electable bodies of government, that being the executive through the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, both within the legislative. So let's illustrate if we had a Republican president right now, and we had a Republican majority within the Senate, and a Republican majority within the House of Representatives, we would have a united government. Contemporary politics do not present a united government. We currently have a divided government, and that is because our executive branch is led by a Democratic president, President Joe Biden. We have a Democratic majority within the Senate of 51 to 49, and then we have a Republican majority within the House of Representatives. And that Republican majority is the reason why we currently understand our government as a divided government. So united and divided, it simply illustrates whether we have one political party at the head of these three bodies. And these three bodies consist of the executive and the two bodies within the legislative, the Senate and the House of Representatives. So a very simple concept, but I understand some of you, when you first hear these terms, you would think about their ability to work together. But remember, that is bipartisanship. So let's keep going. All right. So political parties. Political parties, simply put, are teams of politicians, activists, and voters. And it's important to remember that there are three segments of a political party. It is the politicians, the activists, and the individuals advocating for the interests of the political party at large, and the voters, us. We make up our political parties by simply voting for those candidates. And these three individuals have a collective goal to win control of government. And now, political parties throughout American history have acted as very beneficial for the vast majority of voters, acting as a shortcut for political decision making. Say you are very engaged in one issue regarding politics, but you don't have much engagement with other issues. Say you are an advocate for having a strong military and you are doing everything in your powers to advocate for heightened funding to our military. But there is another issue that's you don't care too much about, but you still have to address these sentiments, say immigration. Well, you can use your party identification as a shortcut to understanding what you are most likely to identify as the adequate policy position for that issue. So many people within American politics use political parties as a shortcut for political decision making regarding issues that they do not engage with as heavily as others. And this also encourages representatives from different regions to work together, as you can think of a Montana Republican and a Florida Republican are probably very different individuals, or a better example, a Montana Republican and a California Republican. They often represent different policy positions, but their party allegiance creates a bridge for them to work together in DC when they are finally elected. And we also see that political parties in recent years, as we all probably know, can act as incentives for polarization among the electorate and among the parties. But we see that, we do see that there is significant polarization, and it is often identified through political parties. But there are more benefits to political parties than we have detriments in polarization, as we see them used as shortcuts for political decision making, in addition to acting as bridges to connect regional differences. And the key takeaway from this slide is that a political party is a collective of 3 different levels of individuals, politicians, activists, and voters who have a common goal to win control of government and represent their interests. Now, when we look at a political party, we see there are 3 general faces to a political party. This is a detailed illustration of that last point. There is the party and electorate. These are the members of the general public who align with one political party. Party and electorate, we make up the party and the electorate. These are the voters. In addition to the voters, we have the party organization. These are the activists. This is the formal structure and leadership of a political party. They consist of election committees, local, state, and national executives, paid professional staff. These are the individuals behind the scenes operating political parties, all while still being very accessible. If you look at the Montana Democratic or Montana Republican parties, you will see that you can find their information on those websites quite easily. And then we have the party in government. These are the individuals that we put all our focus towards. These are the individuals we elect and the elected and appointed at times officials who identify with a particular political party. So we remember there are 3 parts of any political party: the candidates, the activists, and the voters. And right here from bottom up, we see the candidates, the party in government, the activists, the party organization, and the voters, the party in the electorate. 3 important takeaways that you have to remember when we move on. Who makes up a political party? Now, what do these parties tend to do? Well, their primary purposes are right here. They recruit candidates for public office, they organize and run elections, as we see that political parties are the sole institutions and agencies in charge of running political primaries. We will go into that at a later date, probably next week when we cover elections and campaigns. We're going to talk about the influence that the political parties have on their political primary processes, which are quite significant. Now, they also represent alternative policies to the electorate, to the individuals within government. Since we have a 2-party system, we will always have individuals who represent the in-government perspective and the out-of-government sentiments. And this system has worked to be able to balance those who feel disenfranchised from their contemporary political party or their contemporary politics, and gives them access to mobilize through like-minded individuals for their interests. It gives people a starting point for political involvement. Now, they also accept responsibility for the operations of government. This is a significant part of political parties. The political party function for accountability. Sorry, we had a motorcycle riding through the back of my apartment, if that is a little too loud for y'all. But one of the primary responsibilities is to make sure we have a collective we can hold accountable. If one Democratic candidate is caught for corruption, the Democratic Party holds them accountable and then has the responsibility to appoint a new individual who is not going to be corrupt. And we also see that they have they act as the organized opposition to the appointment in power. That was cut off by the video here. But so we see this in the presenting alternative policies position as very similar and overlapping, as they do represent an organized opposition, creating an avenue for engagement for people who are not represented within the contemporary political party system, within the contemporary elected government. So within our current political party system, we have to emphasize a term that we've covered in this class before, but we're going to have to yell it out once more because we have to understand this. This term is pluralism. Condition or system which 2 or more states, groups, principles, sources of authority, etc. coexist. Think of it simply as multiple groups vying for power within a single political system. Now, when we have elections, we tend to have them operate through the plurality rule. This is plurality voting, and it simply means the candidate with the most votes wins the election. 39 states currently have this system, and we also see that we have majority rule. If nobody gets 50% of the vote in some states, like Georgia and 7 others, there is a runoff election. Now, these are things we will cover in detail next week, the inner workings of our elections and our campaigns, but it is important to directly understand that we live in a pluralist system of politics, and it is very essential to understand the definition of pluralism. And the plurality rule and majority voting and the majority rule we will go into more detail next week. I just wanted to start the conversation for you with this slide. Now, there is something called Duverger's law. This is very important because it helps us understand why we have a two-party system, even when a lot of the general population feels like we need more diverse parties and more adequate representation, as we often have the sentiment that our current representatives do not perfectly represent our interests. So, what is Duverger's law? Duverger's law is a theory that asks two questions to illustrate why we have the political system we have. The first question is, how many votes are needed to get representation on any level? And the second question, are people encouraged to vote honestly? Now, I'm going to go into answering these questions in just a moment, but before that, I want to provide the definition for a key term, vote splitting. Vote splitting is when the distribution of votes among multiple similar candidates reduces the chance of winning for any of the similar candidates and increases the chances of winning for a dissimilar candidate. Say we have 3 candidates running for office. We currently have Kamala Harris and Donald Trump running for presidency. So let's add a third individual to this race. And say we added Bernie Sanders into the race, somebody who has a general favoritism within the Democratic Party. So we would see that this third candidate of Bernie Sanders would create vote splitting within the Democratic favored voters, and we would see a significant reduction in the chances of Kamala Harris or Bernie Sanders winning, and an increase in the dissimilar candidate of Donald Trump winning the election. Now, let's go back to Duverger's law now that we understand what vote splitting is. It's the impact that can come with a third party candidate that is similar to one and dissimilar to another. Now, Duverger's law asks 2 questions. Again, how many voters are needed to get representation? Well, if you ask this question in contemporary politics, we would see that you need a majority at most times, say anywhere from 40 to 50%, sometimes even in the 30s. Well, if you need that much voting, you have to focus on getting the majority vote instead of representing your vote perfectly. So the second question, are people encouraged to vote honestly? Well, if you have a system in which 3 individuals are running for office and 2 of them are similar and one is quite dissimilar, you would likely vote for the similar candidate that has the highest odds over the similar candidate who you might favor a little bit more, because you would want to make sure that you have a chance for your candidate to win the election. This would mean you are not voting as honestly as you can. So we see within our electoral system, if we only required 5% to get representation, if we allowed 2 members of this election to get representation on some level, we would possibly see more honest voting. But due to this, we would see more candidates as well. But due to the fact that we need about 30 to 50%, we tend to see voting that focuses on strategy of getting their candidate to win over the dissimilar candidate. And we see that we tend to have a 2-party system, as any third-party candidate would result in vote splitting that would harm the likelihood of the other similar candidate to win. So through vote splitting, we have disincentivized third-party candidates within American politics, and this is clearly understood through Duverger's law, which asks these 2 questions to illustrate why we vote the way we vote, and why we vote honestly or not honestly, and why we may only end up having 2 options for presidency or for various other offices. Now let's talk about contemporary political parties. As we know, there are the 2 dominant ones, the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's a lot of nuance within the definitions of these parties and your identification within them. So I'm not aiming to perfectly illustrate you as a voter, but illustrate the general trends that exist within these political parties. So let me focus on the Democrats first by saying they have a heavy focus on national social programs. And we will go into this in detail. In the next few slides, we are going to provide a breakdown from their party platforms on their websites, illustrating what their main calls to action are. But generally understood, we see Democrats having a heavy focus on national social programs. Think of Social Security, unemployment programs, welfare, Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, and much more national attempts. If you look at the conflict among Roe v. Wade, you see Democrats trying to implement national protections for this issue, while Republicans are focusing on the states' rights dimension of it. And so you see a focus on national protections through the Democratic Party. We also see them generally aligning with identities of environmentalists, urban communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and the liberal identity. Now we look at the Republicans, and these are very general umbrella understandings of these collectives. Republicans tend to have a heavy emphasis on traditional values and institutions. And think of the traditional institution of the family. And if you look at Edmund Burke, the first true contemporary conservative, his focus is on the fact that we have inherited the land, government, and institutions from our previous generations. And if we were to make change to these institutions, we need to respect the developments they made by making gradual change. So Republicans tend to emphasize more gradual change, while Democrats tend to emphasize more radical revolutionary change. And radical might not be the best term to use in that moment, as the changes might not be as radical, but driven by speed and a need to address societal issues, while Republicans have a drive to maintain the progress of past generations. And these are just the foundational, theoretical foundations to these parties. Now, Republicans tend to align with the identities of religious groups, rural communities, nationalists, libertarian camps, and generally align with the sentiment of conservatives, as I just presented through Edmund Burke and his concept focusing on gradual change through institutions. So these are some general overviews. If you look at page 220 in our textbook, they give you more detail. 219 to 221 covers the dimensions of both parties. And something that might be fascinating to some of you, the red and blue connection we have within the Democrat and Republican Party, the Democrats being blue, Republicans being red, was not present clearly until the 2000 election, when we had such a heavy focus through the media on the presidential election between Bush and Gore that was finally solved in the Supreme Court. So very fascinating developments. We see a lot of these connections we have between even just the colors of these parties are new developments in just our lifetimes that were not present prior. Just like some of the sentiments we may have about policy positions within these parties, they develop and change with each generation. Now let's look at what these parties say on their websites regarding their focus. So if you look at the resolutions on their website and the party platform, you can see a focus and you can see the quotations, as every single one of these points was taken directly off of the party website. The Republican Party has a focus within their platform on restoring the American dream, a rebirth of constitutional government, America's natural resources, agriculture, energy, and the environment, government reform. They also focus on great American families, education, healthcare, and the criminal system, and have framing like America Resurgent. So these are the sentiments you see on their website. Last time I checked, I found resolutions on their website stating, quote, condemning Biden's open border policy, deliberately inviting a massive systemic illegal invasion of the U.S., supporting, and I'm reading this from my notes, support of Israel, calling for the unconditional release of hostages and surrender of Hamas, and, quote, opposing the unconstitutional efforts to remove President Trump from the ballot, quote, supporting a transformative energy freedom policy for America, quote, support our Republican electors, and, quote, war fighter protection and amnesty resolution. So we see these sentiments presented by the Republican Party themselves on their website. Now let's look at the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, abstracted from their party platform, you can see that they focus on a stronger and fairer economy, recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. I got these last semester, so they might have shifted a little bit. Quote, universal, affordable, and quality healthcare, building trust and reforming our criminal justice system, combat climate crisis and pursuing environmental justice, restoring and strengthening democracy, creating a 21st century immigration system, and providing a world-class education in every zip code. So you see, even through their own party platforms, there's a lot of overlap on the sentiments, both focusing on the economy, infrastructure, institutions, focusing on education, immigration, and strengthening general democracy and trust in this nation. So we see a lot of overlap, but different focuses and different framing in their attempts to address these issues. And you can find all of this information on their party websites, and I recommend exploring them frequently. At every convention, they debate the party platforms that they will present on their websites for the next few years, and it is important to engage with this and have a clear understanding of what policies these parties back. Now, beyond the simple Democrats and Republicans, we see that there are other candidates in American history. I mean, some of us may have even voted for Kanye West. But we see that third-party candidates in the U.S. have a significant history. We have not abolished the opportunity for third-party candidates to run, although we see through Duverger's law the tendency for third-party candidates to have traction and have an opportunity to win is very much so lacking. But we do see throughout American history there have been three very significant third-party candidates that have gained significant amounts of the vote, and we will dive into that in the next slide. But this slide we are focusing on what third parties are intended to do. Well, third-party candidates are simply parties that do not align with the two primary political parties. They create their own parties or act as independents. Now, these can significantly impact elections even when they don't win by obtaining roughly up to 10% of the vote and changing the impact through vote splitting. Remember, if there are two similar candidates and a dissimilar candidate in a race between three candidates, you are likely to vote strategically and make sure that you vote for the candidate among the two that appeal to your interest that has the highest chance of winning, instead of the one that might, out of those two candidates, appeal to your interest the most. So we also see that third-party candidates have the ability to represent minority positions within government that the two primary parties are not illustrating perfectly. We see sentiments among socialism, libertarianism, even communism at times, extremist interpretation of mainstream positions, and far more, and much, much more. Pluralism, once again, I want to make sure we clearly understand this term, condition or system in which two or more collective states, groups, principles, sources of authority, etc. coexist within a single system of government. So we see third-party candidates throughout American history have caught significant traction. So let's dive into a couple of these individuals. We're going to look at three of them specifically. So let's start early on in U.S. history. Well, not that early on, it's still the 19th century. The 20th century. And in 1912, when Theodore Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate and acted as the most successful third-party candidate in U.S. history, and as he ran through the Progressive Party and obtained 27.4% of the popular vote, more than a quarter of the nation at one point in 1912 voted for a third-party candidate. And we fast forward a bit through 1968, during the significant fight for civil rights and that conflict, we see George Wallace running on a pro-segregationist platform through an independent party who obtained 13.5% of the popular vote in that election, which resulted in the winner of the election being Richard Nixon. Now, George Wallace, on just a pro-segregationist platform, revealed the sentiments of a specific issue, a policy position within American government that 13.5% of the American population supported, pro-segregationists. So this, as I mentioned before, can reveal sentiments among the general population that were not evident through voting within the two political parties. And you see this happening once again in 1992 when Ross Perot comes up and runs for the Reform Party, in which he obtained even more than George Wallace a few decades prior and obtained 18.9% of the popular vote, resulting in Bill Clinton winning the election. Now, Ross Perot ran on a middle-of-the-road reformist platform. He was saying that these two parties do not represent you; they're not close enough to the center, and revealed that a significant portion of the population appealed to these sentiments and did believe that the two parties were moving apart from the center and needed a more moderate candidate in Ross Perot. And we see 18.9% voting for this individual. And there are many arguments that we would not see a Bill Clinton presidency without the candidacy of Ross Perot. Now, let's get some key terms and understanding, and this is the last slide, about how the political party landscape changes over time. We've talked about this in the past, but we need to make sure we have a firm understanding before we move on. So we know generally, beyond party realignment, de-alignment, and tipping, these three key terms which we will have to remember, we see that unique candidates can bring significant shifts in the political landscape, often sparking future party realignment or de-alignments. We see George Wallace sparking the party realignment of the 1960s and 70s as he represented the pro-segregationist platform, pulling many Southern, referred to in history books as the Dixie Democrats, Southern Democrats, out of the Democratic Party, aligning with George Wallace for an election in a third party. And then when they left when George Wallace did not maintain his third party, they left that party and aligned with the Republican Party, creating the most recent party realignment, which is when a significant number of voters leaves one party for another, often through the connection with a third party candidate in the middle there. And there are many arguments about requirements to party realignment. I don't believe we have enough time to look into in the scope of this course. But we see that unique candidates obtaining a large percent of the primary or federal vote can shift our understanding of political parties. We see Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump representing very contemporary examples of this and how they revealed small segments of the population that were underrepresented within their parties. Now, I want it to be known that they did not create a significant enough party realignment to be identified as a party realignment. Or the most recent significant party realignment occurred in the 60s and 70s after the third party candidacy of George Wallace. But we do see their character traits revealing sentiments among the political parties, creating mild shifts within our party identification. Bernie Sanders revealing the sentiment of the 1% against the 99% against the 1%, revealing the sentiments we have regarding income inequality in this country. We also see Donald Trump with similar sentiments, echoing early on in his 2016 presidency, Drain the Swamp, and focusing on a new collective running government. So this revealed a segment of the population that felt significantly underrepresented within the party system prior. Now, we see through that example of George Wallace and the Southern Dixiecrat Democrats what party realignment is. And we've got to understand that first step, when the Dixiecrat Democrats, left the Democratic Party and aligned with George Wallace, that was an example of party de-alignment, which is when a substantial number of voters do not identify with either of the two political parties and they leave and vote for often a third party candidate or do not vote at all. So party de-alignment occurred at that time, which eventually resulted in the party realignment of the 1960s and 70s that we know of today. And we also have to understand the key term, tipping. This is similar. It leads to changes within our political landscapes, but it stems from a population that is growing in size so much that they begin to shift the balance of a district, state, or country. Now, I used an example from a Netflix documentary that is becoming a bit outdated at this point, but the documentary focuses on it's called Wild Wild West, I believe, or Wild West, Wild Wild Country, one of those things. And in this documentary, they focus on a collective in Oregon. It was a small cult who moved into a very rural small town in Oregon. And the cult began growing and growing in size to the point where they began to represent the majority of the population. This was a new collective, a new group that moved into an area and grew in size to the point where they shifted the balance of the political balance of the district. It was no longer a district that 98% were represented by rural Oregon lifelong citizens, and now it represents a brand new ideology about government. And this collective is growing in size to the point where they became a significant voting collective within this district. So tipping, if you watch that documentary, that illustrates tipping perfectly, because they eventually, over time, began maintaining representation within the local government and changing policy positions to appeal towards their interests. So tipping, when a group is growing in size over time, so much so that it shifts the political balance in a district, state, or country. So what did we learn? We need to have these key takeaways as we have every week. They're right here, the main questions that I need you to be able to answer. A lot of this we're going to be building off of next week when we talk about campaigns and elections. We really dive into how our political parties operate within our election seasons. So make sure you look at these questions, and please make sure you look at the answers on this slide. So let's make sure I forgot to include the what's due this week slide, but of course, if you just look on the contents tab, I have that broken down for you at the beginning of the week, every single week. So there are multiple places where this is available, so I think we'll survive without having it in this lecture this week. But please make sure that we go through everything that is due. It is week 8. We have our midterm essay due this week. I tried to make it to where that is pretty much all we're doing. We still have our discussion post requirements, we still have our readings and our lectures, but I do not have an assignment or a quiz. It is just submit your midterm essay. 1 page illustrating the beginning of your essay for your term paper. This is going to be a roadmap that'll make the next step in writing this paper very easy. I'm going to provide you with an absurd amount of comments in every single one of your documents. Even if you get a 100, I will probably mark it up 50 times just to help you understand the direction I hope that you can take this paper. I'm trying to make it as scientific as possible, trying to help you out as much as I can. And really, email me with any questions you may have. I'm always available. I'm always happy to help you. All you gotta do is email me and ask, and you will get whatever you need. So please reach out. Let's keep doing this. I've been talking to a lot of you throughout the semester, and I've had some great conversations. I am very impressed by a lot of you who are continuing to work through some challenges that may be coming up in your personal life or from just the world around us. So pat yourself on the back. Keep doing it. We're at the halfway point. We're almost done. Well, not really. We're only halfway done, but you're thriving, and I'm very happy to be a part of this. And I think the discussions have been going phenomenally so far. Not too much conflict, but a lot of good discussions. You guys are meeting those requirements well, and thank you. So please reach out if I can help in any way. Simpler lecture this week, a little shorter. Political parties, not too much to cover, especially for the fact that we're going to build off of a lot of this next week when we dive into how political parties run campaigns. So thank you. I'll see you guys next week, and I'll be available via email, phone, call, text, whatever, whenever you need me.